Right, we've got Gavin Hurlimann and l8r. They're going to discuss whether the resurrection really happened. And of course, both I and Gavin believe that. And they're going to discuss it. So I'll leave you two to introduce yourselves and then.
You want me to introduce myself first? Yeah, I mean, I have a degree in philosophy. I was a Christian pretty much my whole life until very recently. I've studied lots of things. I enjoy debating Christianity and learning about Christianity in particular because I have such an affinity with it historically. But yeah, no, I want to debate interesting things. Gavin wanted to debate the Old Testament prophecies, and I wasn't really that interested in that. So, but I'm more interested in the resurrection, so we can give it a go.
Go on, Gavin.
Yeah, hi. Howdy, folks. Hi, l8r. Good to see you, my friend. Yeah, so I'm Gavin. Big thanks to Bob for hosting, moderating the debate. Did the resurrection really happen? It's a good old what do they call it, Bob?
Oh, it's been going for 2,000 years, Gavin.
yeah, I know. It's a good old chestnut.
Yeah.
It keeps getting debated back and forth, but just want to thank l8r for agreeing to debate it. And I look forward to a really good charitable debate. l8r is probably one of my top three atheists from Clubhouse. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, do you want to start? Have you decided who's starting first? I'm just going to make Dwayne a mod.
Yeah, normally, Bob, the affirmative side goes first, which will be me.
It's on you then.
Well, I'm happy either way. l8r,
yeah,
do you want to go
first? I just need to know who goes first because I need to do something. So if I go first, I can just do my little piece, and I have to do something else while you talk.
Sure. So are you going to go first?
That or you go. I just need to know who goes first.
Okay. All right. Just hang on a sec.
Yeah, I mean, if you're busy.
I'm almost there.
Yeah. If you're busy,
I'm almost there.
I have my notes.
I'm just going to set my phone up. Just give me a sec, guys. Appreciate your patience. Where are we? Here we are. Okay. So if we put that there, then that might work. Okay.
Why can't I see Dwayne Burke's comment? That's crazy.
All right. Okay. How's my camera Bob?
It's good enough.
Fine,
can see you.
thanks, Gavin.
All right. All right, so shall I crack into it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're willing to do that, that's perfectly fine.
Yeah. I'm gonna set my timer. So it's a 10-minute opening, Bob. So just give me a sec. All right. So I'm gonna start now. All right. So today, my learned opponent and I are going to talk about the resurrection, whether it really happened. So, need to establish a few facts from the outset. So, after the crucifixion, the body of Jesus was buried by Joseph of Arimathea in his own personal tomb. It's highly unlikely that Christians would have invented the story of Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, as Joseph was a member of the Sanhedrin that had arranged the kangaroo court to get Pontius Pilatus, his Latin name, to condemn Christ to death. Liberal scholar John A.T. Robinson says that the burial of Jesus is one of the best attested facts on the historical Jesus. In a refutation to those who denied the entombment of Jesus Christ, Robinson stated that the burial of Jesus is one of the earliest and best attested facts about Jesus. Now, on this following Sunday, on that Sunday morning after the crucifixion on the Friday night, excuse me, folks, we're pretty poor down here in New Zealand. Right, we've got things held together by tape and everything. So on that Sunday morning, a group of women found the tomb absent the body of Jesus. There's a number of reasons why secular and theist scholars accept this fact. That it was a group of women who found the empty tomb strongly argues for the authenticity. Remember, this is first century Palestine, and it's a high context culture. It's also an honour and shame culture. And it was also, unfortunately, a culture where women's testimony was considered worthless. So why would the evangelists have women discovering the empty tomb if they wanted to convince their audience of the historicity of the resurrection? This is probably a reason why Paul does not include the women in his account of eyewitnesses in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 11 through 15, we get confirmation, an early Jewish confirmation, that there was no body in the tomb, because the Jewish guards are basically ordered to say that they were overpowered by the disciples and the disciples stole the body. Joseph Kremer, an Austrian specialist in the resurrection, stated that by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements concerning the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea being empty on that Sunday morning. So after that, on multiple occasions and under different circumstances, various individuals and groups of people experienced appearances of Jesus being alive after his death. These events of his post-resurrection appearances, as quoted by Paul, the apostle, guarantees that they occurred. And they're also based on the fact that there was a great majority of eyewitnesses, more than 500 individuals, who were still alive when Paul committed to writing about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 in around AD 55. Now, there's also a pre-Pauline creed that is often overlooked by people, but it's an early creed, and let's see, pre-Pauline creed that was in wide circulation at least 2 years after the death of Christ, but no more than 3. Former New Testament scholar Norman Perrin, and I say former because he's since passed away, but he writes that the more we study the tradition with regard to the appearances, the firmer the rock begins to appear upon which they are based. Now, E.P. Sanders, who was a New Testament scholar and has taught for many years at Duke University in Oxford, I don't think you can get more skeptical than this if you're a New Testament scholar. He describes himself as a modern, liberal, secularized Protestant. But back in 1993, he wrote a small book, and it was called The Historical Figure of Jesus. And right at the beginning of his book, he just opens up with a blast. And what he does is he writes about the consensus agreement amongst secular and theist New Testament scholars. And he says the following. He says, most scholars agree that after his death, Jesus appeared to his early disciples. How he appeared, writes E.P. Sanders, I am not prepared to say. The point here is that E.P. Sanders is not giving his individual view. He is just writing about what the consensus of scholarship is today about the resurrection. So, where are we going for time? Where's my timer? Okay, that's all right. So, I just want to focus on this pre-Pauline creed. So, the account of the resurrection appearances of Jesus that are found in verses, say, 3 through 7 of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. They're an early pre-Pauline creedal statement. Verses 3 to 5 are possibly one of the earliest creeds about Jesus' death and resurrection. And most secular and theist biblical scholars note the antiquity of the creed probably originated from the Jerusalem apostolic community. The antiquity of the creed has been placed to no more than 3 years after the death of Jesus. The creed has been deemed to be historically reliable and preserves a unique and verifiable testimony of the time. Now, just to quote some scholars here, Jewish historian Geisler, Jewish historian, right? No friend of Christianity. He states that the words of Paul are a tradition he inherited from his seniors in the faith concerning the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Even skeptical scholars agree that the creed, the early pre-Pauline creed of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 it's not an interpolation, okay? It's not a later addition, but was a creed formulated and taught at a very early date after Jesus' death. Gerd Ludemann, who's an atheist New Testament scholar, sadly no longer with us, he passed away in 2021, but he maintained that the elements in the tradition of the early pre-Pauline creed are to be dated to the first 2 years after the crucifixion of Jesus and not later than 3 years. And this is on page 38 of his book called The Resurrection of Jesus. Another atheist New Testament scholar, Michael Goulder, he stated that on page 48 of his book called The Baseless Fabric of a Vision, as quoted in Gavin DaCosta's Resurrection Reconsidered. He states that the early Pauline creed, pre-Pauline creed, goes back to at least what Paul was taught when he was converted, which was a couple of years after the crucifixion. So we've got very early eyewitness affirmation and testimony. Now we've got to remember, this is the first century. It's the year 33. There's no internet, there's no email, there's no phone cameras. All we have is eyewitnesses, and we have plenty of them. So I'm going to read this creed, and then I'll just hand it over to my learned opponent. Okay, here we go. Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. that he was buried, and then he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And after that, he appeared to Cephas, who was Peter, then to the 12, meaning the disciples. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living. Though some have fallen asleep, which is code for that, they've passed on, but most of them are still alive. Then he appeared to James. James was the brother of Christ. And lastly, Paul finishes off by saying, and last of all, he appeared to me also as to one untimely born. And all Paul is meaning by that is saying that Paul would have preferred to have been maybe born at a time that he was able to actually see the crucifixion and be like one of the first people there on that Sunday morning. So that's the early creed. That was 2 to 3 years after the crucifixion, and that's pretty strong. So how are we doing for time? Yeah, that's 10 minutes. So I'll yield my time to my learned opponent now. So that's 10 minutes, Bob.
Okay, Gavin, go on, Dharmakaya. Dwayne Burke is in the side chat and a few other people.
I hope Dwayne's behaving himself.
Oh, yeah, so do I.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Gavin. So I'm going to do this way. I want to respond to Gavin, but I'm going to do it after I give my piece. So I'm going to give my arguments, and then hopefully I have enough time to respond to Gavin. Some of Gavin's arguments, I can't respond to all of them, and I don't want to respond to all of them because I don't think all of them were worth responding to, just some of them, the most important ones. So I have a few different arguments against the view that the resurrection took place. The first argument I would argue is a metaphysical argument. It seems that the claim that someone rose from the dead presupposes that there's some sort of essential aspect to someone that can persist over time such that they can rise from the dead. I don't see any evidence for this in empirical sense data, and there's actually strong scientific evidence against it. For example, memory syndromes, language syndromes that people develop when they hit their head make them believe that they're an entirely different person with entirely different memories and history and languages, which strongly goes against the hypothesis that there's some individual self or soul that persists over time, and that would need to be requisite in order for Christ to rise from the dead. Because if Christ was dead and then he rose from the dead, but there is no self or soul, that means that he would have risen from the dead as a completely different person and not as the same person. So that seems to be a metaphysical assumption that needs to be justified if we want to believe people rise from the dead. Second thing is an epistemic argument. I would say that my position is a very epistemic skepticism rather than what might be termed an epistemic direct realism or phenomenal conservatism. That is to say, I think that we should have an a priori, a default view of being skeptical towards claims rather than being sort of accepting of claims. This is admittedly a perspective that other people disagree with me on, but I think that that perspective is the one we should hold. So that's one of the reasons why sans any sound empirical evidence or justification, that belief should not be believed. My third argument is an Bayesian argument. A lot of people don't understand Bayesianism. I think there was a debate I watched yesterday on, not yesterday, a few days ago on Theology Unleashed channel. I think this apologist, his name is here in Apologetics, I think he used a Bayesian argument, but he misused it because he didn't understand what Bayesianism attempts to do. A Bayesian argument is very simple, right? Bayesian's arguments are entirely empirical arguments. They're based on what the empirical evidence is and then determining what probability we can give to empirical evidence, right? So a good example of this is just, is there a dog, right? That argument, if you said, I have a dog, the probability of that proposition is extremely high by virtue of the fact that a lot of people have dogs. So we can use empirical background evidence to come to a probability that, okay, there's a dog because a lot of people have dogs. Well, if we use that same metric just to apply it to the resurrection, the probability of a resurrection is extremely low because nobody has resurrections, at least as far as we have empirical evidence for. In other words, for the resurrection to be justified, there has to be strong evidence because the probability is already low due to the fact that resurrections almost never happen, if not rarely. If you're at least a Christian, you believe it's rarely. So that's an argument from Bayesian probability. I have an argument from comparative mythology. Resurrections are certainly not unknown to ancient people. People are believed to have resurrected from the dead before Jesus. For example, Inanna, Apollonius of Tyana, Philostratus's work, Osiris rose from the dead according to Plutarch, and so on. So these are not. It's not just Jesus who rose from the dead. The fact that it isn't just Jesus who rose from the dead, and actually, this is my next argument. This is an argument for multiple resurrections. For example, in the Bible, we have Lazarus. There you go. Lazarus, the daughter of the woman of Nain, and I think there's a Cana as well, reference that resurrection. And actually, there's Matthew. In Matthew, it says that plenty of people rose from the dead and marched on Jerusalem. So resurrections are commonplace in history. So the claim that any particular, like Jesus, is special seems to be the Christian view, because Jesus' resurrection is in somehow an event that has some sort of soteriological, apocalyptic, or eschatological significance. So if it does have this, then we have to explain why these other ones don't, because these other ones are at least claimed to have happened, for one. So there's an historical case that has to be made against them, but also a theological case that has to be made against them. Argument from clarity. I'm going to argue that the notion of a resurrection, especially in the early epistles of Paul, which Gavin quoted from, which I'm glad he did, are not clear at all. My most important evidence, and this is going to sort of go into my next point, the historical critical point. When Paul talks about a resurrection, he doesn't make it clear that that's what he's talking about. He uses a word in Greek that is not clear for resurrection. He uses the word agero, which does mean to raise, but it also means to awaken as from sleep. You could have used other words like, for example, anaviosis, that is to say, to come back to life for resurrection. There are many more clear words you could have used if you meant a literal bodily resurrection from the dead, but Paul doesn't use those words. And he doesn't give us very many details at all, and we're going to go into that. Actually, Gavin mentioned some of the details. The women at the tomb wasn't mentioned in Paul. Gavin has an explanation for that, and that's totally fine. But it's very noteworthy that Paul is leaving out key details like this. Paul mentions 515 witnesses to the resurrection, but we don't actually have anything from those witnesses. We just have Paul saying that there were 515 witnesses. Moreover, the Gospels don't record these 550 witnesses in any clear way. So that's very noteworthy. Paul also seems to suggest in 1 Corinthians 15 a spiritual resurrection, not a bodily one. If you go back that whole section immediately after the one that Gavin quoted, but then all the way up to verse 50 or 51, Paul is comparing two types of metaphysics, a natural physical kind of metaphysic and a spiritual non-natural kind of metaphysic. And he's saying the one gets sown and the other one is harvested. And he concludes in a very clear way in verse 50, I think it is, where he says, "What I mean, brothers, is this. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, and corruptibility cannot take on incorruptibility." So he's very clear that he means that this cannot be just a mere physical resurrection, because flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom. That's what he means to say at the end of the verse. He says it very clearly. All right. Later accounts also seem to significantly differ from each other and also embellish the earlier accounts in Paul. That suggests mythological development. Almost every scholar who is not a fundamentalist or a conservative would agree with that. Also, this is something that Gary Habermas, a great New Testament scholar that Gavin, I'm sure, is aware, admitted to me on a Canadian Catholics channel, that the Gospels plagiarize off of each other. Mark is used 100% by Matthew and 60% by Luke. So they're just copying word for word from Mark. But it's very noteworthy that despite copying word for word from Mark, they nevertheless get things wrong compared to Mark. They get things differently. So it's very odd how you'd be able to copy something word for word but also get it wrong. Very, I would say, suspicious kind of source that we're dealing with here. Also, there's evidence that in Dennis McDonald's work that the Gospels use the Iliad and the Odyssey, which is not a reputable historical source. And there are other arguments that scholars have made. So my position is that the Gospels are not reliable sources and that Paul's not a sufficient source. I would also argue and this is my last argument, the argument from the impossibility of knowledge. And what I mean by that is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but effectively it's this. Christians like to say, and this is fine, but they like to say, because I understand their argument, they like to say that if God could rise Jesus from the dead, it follows that the resurrection can happen. That's true, but God could also make it so that all of our beliefs are false. But it doesn't follow from that because God could make all beliefs false, therefore it is false. So the argument that because God exists, therefore resurrection is possible, works just as well for if God exists, then nothing can be known to be true, which means we can't use God as the explanation for the resurrection. Or at least that's not a sufficient explanation. It might be a necessary one. It's not a sufficient explanation. All right, I want to just address a few of Gavin's points before we go on. He mentioned Joseph of Arimathea, that most scholars accept that Joseph of Arimathea existed and all this stuff, and buried Jesus and so on. I'm very convinced of the view that Joseph of Arimathea did not exist and that he was a character constructed by Mark. The evidence for this is that we've never found Arimathea. That's pretty significant, but that's not sufficient, right? I think another good evidence is the fact that the name itself is obviously a fictitious name. Ari is Greek for the best, so you can say Aristos or, yeah, I mean, there's lots of, I think that means like glorious or generous or something. But Ari is simply like a qualifier for the best, the greatest. And mathis, right, is like, you get the word math from that, learning, right? So it's a compound word that is the best, the most learned, or, the best learned one. And it seemed to be to me that this is obviously a fictitious name applied to someone. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't exist necessarily, but I think it's strong evidence against it. It's possible that people who did exist have fictitious names and come from places that didn't exist. That's or at least that we don't have evidence exists. I mean, that's not impossible, but I just find it very conspicuous. The empty tomb. Yeah, the empty tomb. Bart Ehrman says he doesn't believe in an empty tomb, and there are many scholars who do not accept the empty tomb stories. So I'm not going to hold everything on the empty tomb. The 500, I already mentioned before, that we don't have anything by the 500, but we do have Paul's claim that they existed. But we also don't have anything about the 500 in the Gospels themselves. And so if the Gospels are supposed to be reputable historical sources, it's very interesting why they didn't mention them. Gavin says that the creed goes back to Jerusalem and that Paul inherited tradition. Paul actually explicitly denies in Galatians that he received his tradition from no man, but it came from a revelation of Jesus Christ. And so I don't think there's, I think Paul himself denies that. I also think that there's no evidence even if it were true. So it's possible that Paul got his information from Jerusalem, but we don't have anything by the Jerusalem church. So we don't have anything by the Jerusalem church. It's just speculation to say Paul got it from the Jerusalem church. And then he said something about the creed dating within 2 years or 4 years, which is fine. But Bart Ehrman says in his debate with Dan Wallace, he said you can date anything to any way you want. I mean, there's no like criteria necessarily that historians use to date things. The arguments that historians use to date things are, well, we look at internal consistency, we look at maybe the things they mention, the details they mention, we look at maybe the people they know, and then we say, okay, maybe this was dated to that time. There's no necessary reason why we have to date things in certain ways. I'll use a different example. I'll use something that most Christians are not aware of. The Upanishads from Hinduism, or the Rig Veda. We can talk about both of those. The argument has been for centuries in the Indology, right, that the Upanishads are much older than Buddhism. Bronkhorst, who's an Indologist, Ioannis Bronkhorst, makes a good case that the Upanishads cannot be older than Buddhism. Why is that the case? Because the Buddhist texts make no mention of their theology, make no mention of them existing, and neither do Hindu texts at the time make any knowledge of this. So it's very interesting that all of if you date it to a particular time period, but they actually look at the evidence of the time period, no one mentions them. That's a pretty strong case that they didn't exist or that people didn't care about them. But it's pretty interesting why the most important philosophical texts in Hinduism were not cared about people. That's a pretty interesting corollary if in fact that were the case. So Bronkhorst actually dates them much after Buddhism. So that's an example of how historians date things. Another thing that is dated, I think this is wrong. The consensus of the Rig Veda is that it's dated between 1500 BCE and 1250 BCE. But there's a strong case to be made that they're actually dated later, right? I mean, a more conservative dating has been made. I think this is probably true, due to the fact that it mentions the Sarasvati River Valley, which was dried up by the time that the traditional dating gives us. So I think that that's how historians date things. So you can date anything the way you want, but the question is, what's the reasoning? And I don't know what the reasoning is that the creed is so early. Anyway, those are the Gavin's arguments that I responded to, and I gave mine. So that should be it. Yeah, thank you, Gavin, for having me.
Gavin?
Awesome. Yeah, is it time to go? Is it time for me?
Yeah, if we want to cross-examine, or if you want to respond, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, sure. I'll just set my timer. So 8-minute cross-exam, or rebuttal. Bob, is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, you two are gentlemanly enough to work it out between yourselves. You know each other. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try and keep it to 8 minutes. All right. So I've made a few notes here. My learned opponent has brought nothing to the table that I have not heard before. I've probably missed a bit, but we can sort of cover this off in the open discussion. My opponent talked about there being no metaphysical evidence of resurrections. The Bible was written over 1,500 years, and there's nine accounts,
Gavin,
nine eyewitness accounts.
Can I just make it clear? I wasn't saying there wasn't any metaphysical evidence for the resurrection. I'm saying there's no sufficient historical evidence. I'm saying there's no metaphysical evidence of a soul or an enduring self over time. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not saying that resurrections are metaphysically impossible, because I don't think I can support that.
So sorry. Can you just make it clear to me what was your relationship with resurrections and the metaphysical?
No, I have no problem with resurrections being metaphysically. Not only is it metaphysically possible, because you can imagine a possible world, can imagine a modality where people resurrect just because that's how things work. It's not impossible metaphysically. It's just my problem with that is it seems to assume a certain metaphysics about the self, or about consciousness, or about the soul, and that's the metaphysics I'm rejecting. So let me put it this way. I want to make it clear. So if someone gets hit in the head, you could potentially lose your memories, but get a completely different set of memories and a completely different language set and a completely different history. So your identity literally changes if you can be hit in the head and your brain structure changes. Right. I don't see why in principle that doesn't apply to a resurrection. So if Jesus died, then he rose from the dead, it's possible his brain states were just completely different, and that it wasn't Jesus who rose from the dead, but a completely different person after the fact. So I don't think I don't see like a defeater for that. I don't see that in principle that's impossible.
Oh, there's massive defeaters for that. But anyway, we'll carry on. So based on the data points, there's extremely good evidence that theism, and by extension the resurrection, is far more probable than atheism. This is a fact. Now, my opponent
Gavin,
talked
you just froze there.
Oh, sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that working
now? I think it's out of sync.
Hello.
Oh yeah, you're good now.
Okay. So my learned opponent, he talked about there being no record of those who were witnesses to the resurrection. This is not true. This is not true at all. Here we go. Where are we? Okay, so I'll run through the list of names that we do know from the Bible who witnessed the resurrection. Joanna, these are the women that were at the tomb on the Sunday morning. Joanna, the four Marys, Mary Magdalene, Mary who was the mother of Christ, the widow of Joseph, another Mary who was the mother of James and Joseph, or Joses. There's also Mary, the wife of Clopas, and there was Salome, mother of James and John, who were nicknamed the sons of thunder. There was Peter, who was a witness to the resurrection. There was James, the brother of Jesus. There was also Simon, Andrew, James, John, Matthew, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, another James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, who was also called Labiasus, and Simon the Zealot. There was also, let me see. There was also Barnabas, Andronicus, who was the husband or the brother of Junica. Junius, but it's not clear whether he was the husband or the brother. We're not sort of super clear about that. But Andronicus, Junia, Silas, Timothy, and Apollos. Saying we don't have any records of the 500. It's a bit of a nothing burger argument. We're talking about the first century. High context culture, also a shame and honor culture. You'll notice in the pre-Pauline Creed that most secular and religious scholars agree that was in wide circulation 2 years at the least and no more than 3 years at the most. That was in wide circulation.
Yeah, I mean, can you tell me what scholars say that?
Hey, this is my time.
I thought it was a cross-examine. So I'm sorry. Maybe I thought it was a cross-examine.
Yeah, I haven't asked you a question yet.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. So this pre-Pauline Creed was in wide circulation as little as 2 years, no more than 3 years after the death of Christ. That's a very short time. That's an extremely short time between an event and a record being circulated. I've got dates here for text from authenticity from Tacitus, Suetonius, Caesar's histories, Aristotle's, Herodotus, and they've got these huge time gaps between the actual original manuscript or the event and the earliest copies. So we could probably discuss that. So there is a record of eyewitnesses to the resurrection. And you mentioned that the Gospels were plagiarized. That's really funny because Mark and Luke knew each other. They knew each other really well. So saying that they're plagiarized is a little bit it's a bit funny. It's a bit sort of strange.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's what Gary Habermas agreed with me. I can send you that too if you want.
Now, yeah, look, I know about what Gary Habermas is saying, which is why I said you brought nothing new to the table. Now, you also said that Paul denies the early pre-Pauline Creed. That's simply an argument from silence. Because I've already read the pre-Pauline Creed that he wrote down in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. So this is the pre-Pauline Creed that was in wide circulation 2 to 3 years after the resurrection. So it's early. It's early and it's eyewitness. And we've got some really good attestation from the church fathers. But you talked about Bart Ehrman, so I'll just quote from him. Okay, so where's this from? This is from Bart Ehrman, page 230 from his book, Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium. And he writes from page 230, he writes, "We can say with complete certainty that his disciples at some later time insisted that Christ appeared to them, convincing them that he had been raised from the dead." Gerd Ludemann, atheist New Testament scholar. He writes on page 80 of his book, What Really Happened to Jesus, a Historical Approach to the Resurrection. This guy's an atheist, or he was. Like I say, he's passed on. But he says on page 80 of his book, it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which he appeared to them as the risen Christ. Bart Ehrman again, on page 276 of his book, A Historical Introduction to the Early Christian Writings, Bart says, the reason I'm using these guys is because they're not like Christian friendly. It's kind of like, it's almost like enemy attestation. They're not like, super friendly to Christianity. So Bart Ehrman writes on page 276, it's a historical fact that the followers of Jesus believed that he had been raised from the dead soon after his crucifixion. We know some of them by name. The Apostle Paul claims quite plainly to have seen Jesus alive after his death. And yeah, that's what Bart Ehrman has to say about that. So the weight of evidence for the resurrection is pretty much in favour from the theist view. Check my time. Oh, that's it. That's 10 minutes. That's heaps of time. So I'll stop there.
I thought that was a cross-examination, but that's okay. I'll just reply to a couple.
Go for it. Take your time. Take your time. I'm not too much worried about the time, my friend.
I don't want it to be too much because I don't really want to be here for too long. I think debates should be shorter than longer. But anyway, I just want to point out two things. So the first thing you said, resurrection. Yeah. You quoted what you did at the end there. Literally, you quoted Bart Ehrman, and then you said there's good evidence for the resurrection or something like that, which is fine. I understand why you might conclude that based on Bart Ehrman, but Bart Ehrman himself debated, I think, Mike Licona on the resurrection. Actually, I think he debated Craig on the resurrection, William Lane Craig, and he didn't believe that. So, it's fine to quote Bart Ehrman as a source to support your claims, but Bart Ehrman himself doesn't really believe those claims. It's also very important to point out that Gerd Ludemann, Bart Ehrman says that he changed his views on the empty tomb. And maybe he did, maybe he didn't. That's not my business to, I'm not here to defend Bart Ehrman. I don't like Bart Ehrman. He can defend himself. I'm just saying that Bart Ehrman thinks that he's changed his views on the empty tomb. He doesn't think it happened now. Maybe in the past he thought it happened, but he doesn't believe that now. Gerd Ludemann actually changed his views. He mentioned Gerd Ludemann. Gerd Ludemann actually was an atheist, or not was an atheist. He is an atheist. He was a mythicist. Gerd Ludemann was a mythicist, but he changed his views back to believing that there was a historical Jesus. And so I don't think it's very good to quote someone in favor of a historical Jesus and a historical resurrection, someone who used to be a mythicist and denied both. I think that's a very dangerous argument to make. But no, a lot of what he said, I definitely understand why scholars say that. I just don't think that that's the case. I don't mind what scholars say, but I'm more interested in what the evidence is. There might very well be scholars who believe this, but I want to know what their evidence is. I reject, and I'm not just being sort of like inconsistent. People often accuse atheists of being inconsistent about their skepticism. That's understandable. There are some atheists who are. I'm not one of them. I reject the consensus of scholars when it comes to economics. I can reject the consensus of scholars when it comes to linguistics. I reject the consensus of scholars when it comes to the dating of the many of the Vedic texts. So I'm not just rejecting consensus of scholars in Christianity. I'm being consistent. I think they don't have good reasons to support what they're saying. That's kind of just my position. But yeah, I'm not seeing anyone, so hopefully Gavin's still here.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. No, that's really all I wanted to say. There was a lot you said, so I don't really remember all of it.
Sure, that's fine. That's fine. Bob, are you still with us?
Yeah, I mean, you two can remind each other of what each of you has said and discuss it that way if you want to. It's up to you.
Sure. Bob, are my citations in the video description?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my friend, I'm hearing claims from you regarding Bart Ehrman and Gerd Ludemann, but I'm not seeing any evidence that you've provided. You're just saying things, you know. It's good when you come to a debate to bring supporting evidence so that what you say can be fact checked to whether it's true or not. So all right, where are we? So I've got a whole list of citations that Bob has put onto the video description, so you can fact check any one of the scholars that I've quoted from. And the reason I quote from scholars is because these are guys who have spent their careers studying what they talk about. Now, regarding the dating or the earliness of these reports of the resurrection, there is scholarly support that Matthew's gospel. Well, first of all, I'm going to favour an early dating, and that'll be a dating that's pre 70 AD, simply because pre 70 AD there were major events that happened that if you were a Christian gospel writer, or somebody like Paul who wrote up to 14 of the epistles in the New Testament. Pre 70 AD, there was the Neronian persecutions, where Nero tried to blame the Christians for the fire in Rome. This was a big deal, you know. Many Christians went to their death because of this. Also, too, there's the martyrdom of Paul and of Peter in the early 60s. Now, obviously, Paul's not going to write about that because he's dead. But then, you know, look, the Acts of the Apostles, or the Book of Acts, is attributed to Paul's amanuensis and traveling companion Luke. Now, Luke doesn't mention the martyrdom of Peter and of Paul. You'd think that these would be, you know, big deals. That there'd be something sort of major to include. So we kind of know that Paul was executed circa 63, 64 AD, and Peter shortly before him. So then that brings the Gospels to a time period of pre 70 AD, and Mark and Luke, they knew each other, you know. They knew each other. This is obvious. So there's scholarly support that Matthew's Gospel was written as soon as 10 to 12 years after the crucifixion. And the reason for this is because he completed his gospel before he left Jerusalem to preach the gospel in other lands. And it's recorded by Origen, Eusebius, Irenaeus, Papias, that Matthew left to preach the gospel 10 to 12 years after the crucifixion. So his gospel was completed 10 to 12 years. Let's say it was completed 12 years after the crucifixion. If we take 33 AD to be the time of the crucifixion, that's 43. That puts Matthew's gospel at around, say, between 40 and 45 AD. That's extremely early, particularly when we compare works of antiquity like Herodotus, and his histories. There's a 1,300 year time gap between the original manuscript and the earliest copies we have, and we've only got 8 copies of Herodotus. Aristotle's work, there's only five surviving early copies of Aristotle's work, and the time gap between the original manuscripts and the earliest copies we've got is 1,400 years. Suetonius, when he wrote his Roman histories, the time gap between the original manuscripts that he wrote and the earliest copies we got is 800 years. And Tacitus, with his Greek histories, there's only 20 copies. 20 copies of copies left, and there's a 1,000-year gap between the original manuscript and the earliest copies. There's only 5 copies of Aristotle's work, and yet there's close to 6,000, almost 6,000 copies of the New Testament, and the time gap is like an eye blink in terms of writings from authenticity. So I'll stop this and give you a chance.
Yeah. Okay. So a big thing I could have argued I didn't, but I think I will because you keep bringing it up. The manuscripts. Actually, the existence of any manuscripts of the New Testament is evidence against Christianity as we know it. And the reason why that is because in order to be able to read or write at all in the ancient world, you had to have been part of the moneyed elite. And in fact, the amount of money that to print any book in the ancient world would have cost is roughly 100,000 of our U.S. Modern dollars. So the only people who could have written the books of the Gospels would have had to have been the elites, would have had to have been the rich, which makes it very unlikely that the apostles of Jesus, at least according to what we know about them, who were illiterate, largely unlettered, largely rural, largely Palestinian, non-Greek, not educated, would have written them. So that's a big problem if you're going to argue for the legitimacy of these texts from the claim that they were traditionally authored. Another thing is that Gavin gave us few different dates of the Gospels, Gospel Matthew being 40, 45, and so on. I just want to point out that is very much a fringe position. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it is not the mainstream view of scholarship. Bruce Metzger, Bart Ehrman's mentor, who is a fundamentalist, he's not liberal like Bart Ehrman was. He has a book called The Oxford Handbook to the Bible, and they go over all the dating in that book of various texts of the Bible, and the consensus is definitely that Mark was written post 70. My personal opinion is that Mark is probably near 90 CE, but it doesn't matter. I'm not a scholar. But it doesn't matter, like I said, because that's not the consensus. So Gavin has the burden to show why this earlier dating is the one we go with. Gavin said, well, they knew each other. Mark, Matthew, Luke, John knew each other. Yeah, that's not a good thing either, because if they knew each other, then that's an argument that they could be colluding, and there could be a conspiracy to intentionally tell the story that they want to tell. I think it'd be better if they were independent accounts that didn't know each other, like we have for Plato, for example, with Plato's Republic being, and not just the Republic, but other dialogues being sources for Socrates, but also having Xenophon, who didn't know Plato at all, being an independent source that verified it. If they knew each other, that's a case that you could make. I don't know if I would make it because I don't believe what Gavin's saying, but if you wanted to make that case, you could say that they were conspiratory in that regard. So no, that's a dangerous argument. I wouldn't make that argument. So yeah, the number of manuscripts. So yeah, it doesn't really matter how many manuscripts you have a tradition if you don't have the earliest ones, or even if you have very early ones, you don't have the originals. Most scholars will tell you, who are textual scholars, will tell you we can't get back to the originals. We can only get back to the earliest form of the text, what's called Aufsfang's text. And the reason why that is because our earliest complete manuscript of the Bible comes 300 years after Jesus. It's the Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Alexandrinus. And so we might have parchments before that, but they're not complete. The earliest parchment that I'm aware of is about a 2nd century Gospel of John manuscript called P52. Maybe we made discoveries since then. I haven't checked recently, but still, that's decades later. And the earliest complete Gospels and Bible we have is hundreds of years later. So that's still a pretty big gap. Plenty of time for people to just completely forge documents and interpolate. And that's in fact what Bart Ehrman argues did happen. Bart Ehrman has a book called The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, misquoting Jesus. There are many books where he argues this, and he says, look, we can just show in the passages that there are these problems because someone must have forged a text to make this problem happen, right? For example, we see in our current manuscripts that people tried to change in Galatians 4, where it says born of a woman, they tried to change that text. They used originally the word is genomai for create, and that's the word that our modern Bibles use because scholars know that's the original, or at least that's the closest we have to the original. But many people tried to change it to genao because they wanted it to say something it didn't say. And we have evidence in the manuscripts today that that's what they tried to do. So we know that this did happen, that Christians like to change their manuscripts, or maybe they weren't Christians. I mean, I don't know. I'm not the one who decides who's the right Christian, who's the wrong Christian, but the scribes who wrote the texts changed the manuscripts in various ways. And we have a 300-year gap between our complete Bible and the originals. And so there's plenty of time for them to change it. But that's not argument against the resurrection, right? I'm not saying because the texts were changed, therefore that resurrection did happen. That's not my argument. I think that's a silly argument anyway. I'm just saying I don't think I can trust the accounts of the resurrection. That pretty much settles what I think I heard from Gavin there. So yeah, I mean, I think that's good. If you want to, I don't know if you want to do a cross-examine or you want to do closing statements or what do we want to do? But yeah, that covers what I heard.
I'll just finish off. The problem is, my friend, you're making arguments from silence. You've got no evidence, and you're making claims. As far as the early dating of the New Testament manuscripts, we do have, and historians do have, a fragment from Matthew's Gospel, and it's chapter 26. It's called the Magdalene manuscript. So I'll just read about it here. The most significant find, however, is a manuscript fragment from the book of Matthew, chapter 36, which is called the Magdalene manuscript, which has been analysed ad nauseum. Scholars using sophisticated analysis of the handwriting of the fragment by employing a special state-of-the-art microscope differentiated between 20 separate micrometer layers of the papyrus, measuring the height and the depth of the ink as well as the angle of the stylus. Stylus just means the pen used by the scribe. After this analysis, scholars were able to compare this Magdalene manuscript with other papyri from that period, notably manuscripts found at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated at the latest to 50 AD. There's another manuscript fragment called the Herculaneum, which is dated prior to 79 AD. Another one at the fortress of Masada, which is dated to 73, 74 AD. And finally, a papyrus from the Egyptian town of Oxyrhynchus. The Magdalene manuscript fragment matches all four of these previously mentioned fragments, and is almost a twin of the papyrus found in the Oxyrhynchus fragment, which bears the date of 65, 66 AD. So, scholars conclude that St. Matthew's Gospel was written no later than 65, 66 AD, but probably earlier, and possibly, they're just saying possibly. They're not saying that this is a ballpark slam dunk, but they're saying possibly this fragment is a piece of the original manuscript of Matthew. If it's not, then it's a very, very immediate early copy, which was written while Matthew and the disciples and the eyewitnesses to the events were still alive. This makes it the oldest manuscript portion of our Bible in existence today. It's one which coexisted with the original writers. So what's even more important is what it says. This fragment of Matthew 26 uses the text nomina sacra, holy names, such as the diminutive is for Jesus, and ke for Kuru or Lord. This is significant because it suggests that the Godhead of Jesus, the triune God, was recognized centuries before it was accepted as official church doctrine in 325 AD. So that's that. I think this objection about the New Testament itself is evidence against itself because of the cost to put it together. That's just an argument from silence. Yeah, that's just speculation. So anyway, I'll end it there. You can have a go.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I just need to get my food because I haven't eaten anything all day. And it's getting late.
Take your time. Take your time.
Let's turn that ad off. Okay. Yeah. Great. So yeah, I mean, do you want me to respond or?
It's up to you. Up to you. Totally up to you.
Yeah. No, I'm fine if we do like a 10-minute like cross examination and then we just wrap.
Sure.
We just do concluding statements or something. I think that's perfect.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So I guess do you want to ask me questions or do you want me to ask first?
Well, you go first because I've been talking for a while.
Yeah, great. So so it seems like your argument hinges upon. So here's what your argument seems to hinge upon, from my understanding. Seems like you're assuming a particular dating based on certain historical sources or historical experts, and that based on the manuscript traditions, you're saying that this is reliable. Is that what your argument would be, or I just want to make sure?
Oh, as far as the dating of the records of the resurrection, yeah, I'm relying on the earlier dating based on scholarly support and based on.
That's not really what I'm meaning to say. I'm just asking what exactly, like, if you had to like sum it up, like in one sentence, what exactly is your argument? Would it be that the historical evidence, historical experts, and textual evidence is the argument?
Both secular and theist New Testament scholars are in agreement that the resurrection actually occurred. So I'm basing my argument on their opinions because they're the experts in the field.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Okay, so would one scholar that said the resurrection didn't happen, would that not persuade you, or how many scholars would it take to persuade you that it didn't happen? Or would maybe instead of asking about scholars, what historical evidence would persuade you that it didn't happen? Or maybe that's not the right word. Might not have happened. That's the right word.
Okay. The consensus of New Testament scholarship is that the resurrection did happen. There's always going to be some fringe outliers who contend that it didn't happen, but they're the minority. So I'm going with the consensus that say it did happen.
Yeah, I mean, so should I? I'm wondering if we should go. You're saying we should go with the consensus. So you think we should just go with consensus on every belief, or do you think that it just should be just for Christianity? So, for example, would you say that the consensus of linguistics that there's a universal grammar? Do you think that's true? And do you think the consensus of economics there's micro foundations to macro phenomena? Do you think that that's true just because the consensus says it, or what's your criteria? Do you just think that the consensus has the evidence, or?
Yeah, I can sense a lot of wiggling going on here. That's not even on topic. So we're talking about the resurrection.
Well, no, this is on topic because I want to know, because it seems like what your argument is that that the consent. It seems like what you just said was that the argument is that the consensus says it, which is why we should believe it. Is that not what you just said, or if that's not, you could correct me.
The consensus of New Testament scholarship, whether it's secular or theist, is that the resurrection did occur. It's a historical fact.
Yeah, no, but I want to know if you're consistent. Like, so is it just the consensus of New Testament that you accept, or are you just saying that? I want to know if you're consistent. I'm not getting where what criteria you're using. For me, consensus doesn't matter. So for you, it seems to matter. That's why I'm kind of trying to figure out what your criteria is.
Well, it matters to me because I don't think of myself as an expert. I try to demonstrate, humility and look to the experts who have made careers out of studying the New Testament. I'm no expert whatsoever, but I will refer to the experts who are the authorities.
Right. Okay, that's fair. So the expert view on the Old Testament, right, and of Near Eastern studies and of Egyptology, is that almost none of the events took place. There are some people like Deaver who think some of the events took place. Would you say that you accept that consensus, or would you say that they have the wrong evidence or the wrong arguments?
Well, you have no evidence for what you're saying, Dharmakaya, and we're not talking about the Old Testament. We're talking about the resurrection.
Yeah. Well, I just referred to you by Metzger's book, and there are other books like Thomas, what's his name? Well, anyway, Israel Finkelstein's book, Bible on Earth. There's Joshua Bowen's books. There's the book I mentioned by Metzger, Oxford Handbook to the Bible. So there are books that do explain this consensus. But you're right. Of course, it's not. I'm just trying to figure out what your criteria is. Okay, so I'll tell you my criteria, and then maybe you can respond to that. My criteria is a purely evidential-based approach, effectively. If I don't see the evidence there for it, I can't really accept it. Problem with resurrections is that we have no evidence of any resurrection happening regularly. We could argue that it does happen, and there's nothing wrong with arguing that it happened. We don't see it happening regularly. We see rainfall happening regularly. We see drought happening regularly. We see people tripping over themselves. We see people making fools of themselves on television. We see a lot of things regularly, but one of the things we don't see people doing all the time is resurrecting from the dead. So that means that the evidence has to be pretty good for that claim. And I just don't see the evidence being very good for the claim. It seems like all we have is a couple of forgeries in Josephus. We have Paul's testimony, but Paul's testimony is lacking very crucial details for me. And the Gospels seem to be, as Gavin himself admitted, aware of each other. And according to Gary Habermas and Consensus of Scholarship, I mentioned Metzger. You can read this in that book. They would say that it's not even close. 90% of Mark is in Matthew, and 60% is in Luke. And Luke is using huge sections of Matthew also. So, I mean, to me, that's not sufficient evidence to warrant a claim. I'm not saying it's not evidence, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm going to be very clear. I'm not saying it's not evidence at all. I'm just saying that for me, that's not sufficient evidence, right? It's certainly a necessary condition. It's not a sufficient condition. And that's kind of my perspective on at least the resurrection in particular. A similar thing I could use as an example. There's a story I think it's in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the Vedic tradition, right? Where Krishna has millions and infinities of himself that he's multiplied just so that, or I think it's actually maybe Brahma that he multiplies just to like make the one Brahma like stupefied. He wants to like show his power and glory and so on. I mean, that's not impossible. I don't deny that Krishna could have done this. Krishna certainly could have done this. It's not impossible. I just don't trust that story. And the reason I don't trust the story of the Srimad Bhagavatam is because we don't have any evidence of it being used until the 10th century CE. Ramanuja Acharya, one of the great scholars of Vedism, didn't have it and neither did anyone prior to the 10th century. So the idea that it happened is unlikely because the story is so late that it doesn't have corroborating evidence. And so I'm not being inconsistent. I'm being very consistent. I don't accept that story. I don't accept the resurrection story. I don't accept the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Iliad and the Odyssey. To me, that those are all the same in that regard because I don't see the sufficient evidence for those stories. So yeah, you can go. I don't know if you want to extend the cross-examine 5 minutes because we're almost out of time, but then we can do closings.
Yeah, sure. You say you're using the evidentialist approach. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any evidence, Dharmakaya. All I've heard is claims. And you've made a big deal about the fact that Mark and Luke colluded because they knew each other. Well, so what? So what? And you've talked about Krishna, Brahma, and Vedism. Vedism? We're not talking about Krishna, Brahma, Vedism. We're talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So this is not good. It's not good to turn up to a debate without evidence and just make claims because they really mean nothing. Claims are like opinions, you know. Everyone's got them, but unless you can back them, then they don't really mean anything.
Yeah, I mean, Gavin, do you think that historical analogy is just a wrong use of language or wrong use of logic?
Sorry?
Well, what I've been doing is I've been making historical analogies. Do you think that that's just not a proper way to use logic?
You've been claiming historical analogies, but when you come to a debate, if you want to be professional about your presentation, you come with supporting evidence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of historians are okay with using historical analogies, but I mean, if you don't consider them valid, that's fine. I'm just saying that that's kind of my position. So we've reached like the 10-minute mark. Do you want to go a few more minutes and then do closing, or what do you want to do? Depends on how long you want to go. I don't want to go more than 2 hours. I was thinking maybe we could wrap it up by 1:30. 1 hour 30
What's
minutes.
the time? What's the time now for you? What's the time now for you?
Well, it's an hour 12 minutes almost. So I was thinking an hour 30 minutes or 2 hours at most.
All right. Okay, so I'll finish off. I'll just finish with this.
Is this your concluding statement?
Oh yeah, why not? Yeah, why not?
Yeah, fair.
So this is the wind up, Bob. So I brought an argument to the table, plus I brought evidence. As everyone can see, my citations are listed in the video description. They can easily be checked. It is the consensus. It is the consensus of secular and theist New Testament scholars that the resurrection happened. It took 1,500 years to write the entire Bible, from the opening verses in Genesis to the closing verses in Revelation. And contained in that 1,500 years of literature is 9 resurrections, 9 including Jesus Christ's resurrection. My opponent has made a lot of arguments from silence. I think my opponent said something about Paul never mentions the pre-Pauline Creed in his writings. Well, that's just patently false. Patently false. I'll read it to you here. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. This is the creed that was in wide circulation 2 years or no later than 3 years after the death of Christ. And this is the creed. Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried and he was raised on the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, that's Peter, and then to the 12 disciples. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep, which means they've passed on. Then he appeared to James. James was the Lord's brother or half-brother. Then to all the apostles. And last of all, he appeared to me as to one untimely born. That was especially verses 3 through to, say, the end of 7. That was a creed that was in wide circulation as soon as 2 years post the resurrection, but no later than 3. That's an eye blink. That's an eye blink when you consider this is an event that happened 2,000 years ago. I've provided page numbers, names of books, and the author, and what they've stated. And I'll probably finish here with a quote from a documentary that was on ABC on June 26, 2000, and it was from Paula F. Frederickson. Now, she's a convert to Judaism. So she's not a Christian, but she's a historian, well known. And she says on this doco, I know in their own terms, when she's talking about those who had seen the raised Jesus, she says in this doco, June 26, 2000, on ABC, called The Search for Jesus. She says this, she says, I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. I wasn't there, so I can't say what they saw, but, she says, but, whenever there's a but, it's either good news or bad news for somebody. But as a historian, she says, as a historian, they must have seen something. Later on in the documentary, Paula F. Frederickson, I'm tripping over my tongue here, Paula Frederickson states that the disciples' conviction that they had seen the risen Christ is part of historical bedrock. Facts known past doubting. And I'll yield my time there.
All right. Let me see if I can sum up quick here. I don't want to be too slow. So anyway, my arguments were a metaphysical argument against a resurrection, not because resurrections can't happen, but because it doesn't make sense to talk about a resurrection happening, in the sense that any individual person doesn't necessarily have a soul or a self that persists over time, because there's no evidence of a soul or a self that persists over time. And there is scientific evidence that shows that that's not the case, based on scientific evidence of changing memories, changing histories, and changing languages when you have injuries. So that shows that a resurrection is an incoherent notion, because to say someone rose from the dead assumes that there's someone that persists over time. So that doesn't make any sense. Bayesian argument from probability. So as I said, there are regularities that we can see. If someone has a dog, it's very regular. People have dogs. People have dogs all the time. People do not resurrect from the dead all the time. So if something is not regular, that means it has to be sufficient evidence to establish the claim. A bunch of books written by people who we don't have originals of is not sufficient evidence for me. Comparative mythology and multiple resurrections. So this argument says, look, there are other people who rose from the dead in history if we believe that they existed, such as Inanna, Osiris, Apollonius of Tyana, as well as people like Lazarus in the Bible, among others. And so if these other people rose from the dead, that means that Jesus is not special. He's not some unique person. Historical critical evidence. Gavin saying I don't have it, but I mentioned that the consensus of scholarship is that the Gospels are after 70 and later, and that they copy off one another. I mentioned the Oxford Handbook to the Bible. Oxford is not some fringe atheist skeptical thing. It's actually mainstream university, and almost no one really denies that. Princeton University, Oxford University, Yale University, these are big presses, and these are big universities, and they have very big stature, so they're not to be taken without consideration. Argument for the impossibility of knowledge. As I said before, You could say that you could make the case that, oh, God could raise Jesus from the dead, so therefore he did. You could make the case just as well that God could make all beliefs false, and therefore he did. But it doesn't follow either way. What God could do does not mean that God actually did that. And to sum up, Gavin appeals to consensus to make his argument, and it seems like he also appeals to phenomenal conservatism, that is to say the position that things should just be the way they are unless we have evidence presented to the contrary. I reject both of those positions. I think that things are not as they seem unless evidence is provided that they are that way, as well as I rejecting not only the consensus of New Testament scholars, but the consensus of Indology, the consensus of linguistics, consensus of economics, not because I am some arrogant person, although, I mean, I might have some ego, just because I don't think they've met the burden of proof and provided the evidence for the claims that they make. This isn't and shouldn't be shocking to Christians, by the way, because Christians reject the consensus often. I shouldn't say they all do, but they often reject the consensus in biology that evolution took place, and that's totally fine. But that means we have to be consistent. If we're going to accept consensus, we accept it. Otherwise, we reject it. We have to pick one of those. Historical analogy. I made historical analogies to the Vedas several times, and I think that they fit. I could make historical analogies to other texts. The fact of the matter is, I don't believe that Krishna talked to Arjuna in the Battle of Kurukshetra for a very obvious reason, that the text was interpolated into the Mahabharata, and we have evidence that it was. On the other hand, Gavin seems to believe that we when we do in fact have interpolations in the Bible, or could have, because we have a 300-year gap between the complete one and the originals, that we shouldn't take those into considerations on this question. I think that that's a double standard. I think that historical analogy is very important. Authorship claims. Again, the consensus is that the texts were not written by the people ascribed to them, but we could debate that. It's totally fine. There are debates on that by, for example, Richard Bauckham, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. He argues that did happen. I argue that it cannot happen because the texts would have been too expensive to produce for the people if they wrote them, and that there's no way that Aramaic, illiterate, unlettered, rural people would have known sophisticated Greek. So that's the argument for that, and that basically sums up my position. Oh, actually, no, I wanted to make one more point. Gavin incorrectly said that I said there was no pre-Pauline Creed. I actually said multiple times that I agreed that there was a Pauline Creed, and I actually cited it. And I just cited it to say something different than what Gavin was saying. I cited it to show that there was no bodily resurrection, that it was a spiritual resurrection. And Paul's thesis after the initial part of the creed, I think it ends at verse 14, but then it goes all the way down to verse 50. It ends with the statement that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, showing that this is not a physical resurrection, because Paul does not believe that flesh is pure and worthy. He says corruptibility cannot be inherit incorruptibility. So anyway, so that's my position. So we disagree. I think we should have different presuppositions, but that's totally fine. Thank you, Gavin, for having me.
Thanks, my friend.
If you have an interesting debate, maybe we can debate something more interesting or something that you're interested in later.
Is there any questions, Bob?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's hear them.
Oh, questions. Oh, yeah. I think Paul, obviously we know that me and you agree that Paul was an apostle, of course. He could not have been an apostle unless he'd been an eyewitness. He would have been around to see Jesus Christ resurrected. The qualifications for an apostle are in Acts chapter 1. So I think he would have even witnessed Jesus being baptized as well. He was one of the
any questions? Yeah, Bob, is there any questions from the audience?
If there are any questions from the audience, just put capital Q, and I will put it up on screen. I'll read it out for you. Nobody's actually put any questions in, but if anybody,
maybe our arguments were so compelling.
How many people were resurrected? Because if I remember correctly, when Jesus was resurrected, there were, what was the exact number? A couple of hundred other people were resurrected around the same time, and they went into town, didn't they? It was, I know.
Well, that's what Matthew's gospel says. However, that's a kind of a contentious debate that still rages. It could be just hyperbolic literature, or it could be actually literal, but it's still contested today.
Yeah. But that's a miracle in itself, isn't it, Gavin, that we're talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ approximately 2,000 years later still. And I would say that Christians are proof, really, of a resurrected Jesus. Those apostles were risking their lives preaching that Jesus Christ is resurrected. They were risking that. Well, obviously, Paul did persecute the early church, but the Romans were pretty clever at that as well. You know, you go against their religion, you're going to croak if they, get the paws on you. And they all did. You don't risk your life for a lie. Nobody does. Even Dharma wouldn't risk his life for a lie, would you, Dharma?
Yeah, I actually don't agree that people don't risk their lives for a lie. If the lie is powerful enough to believe in, you'd risk your life for it. I mean, look at Russia right now. Russia's lying about what's going on in Ukraine. They're all dying for it.
Yeah, that's presentism. I mean, the world has become, I would say, 100 times possibly more corrupt than it ever was at the time of Jesus Christ. It sounds like presentism. I do understand what you mean.
Yeah. Well, I also disagree with that. I kind of agree with the book of Ecclesiastes that things go on the way that they go on, and all vanity and all that.
I think you would agree that they have been getting worse even in the last 20 years.
No, I actually don't agree with that. I think that in the last 5 years things have been getting worse, but I think things have been getting better overall. But again, to me, it's not really, it's subjective because it depends on how you define what something is better is, right? And that's a huge conversation.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Because I'm looking at I have a different worldview to you. I'm looking through a different lens, and you're looking through, I don't know. I'm assuming you're some sort of Buddhist, are you? Or
yeah, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist.
All right, okay. Buddhism didn't do Buddha much good because he's still dead.
Yeah, but the Buddha. So in Buddhism, here's a very good thing I think that makes Christianity different than Buddhism, and I think I prefer Buddhism actually in this regard. For Christianity to be true, Jesus has to have existed and has to have rose from the dead, right? But for Buddhism, Buddha doesn't have to exist, because for us, everything is void of any inherent existence. So if Buddha didn't exist, it's actually better for us, because we can argue our case better. Our teachings are truer if the Buddha didn't exist. So it's actually a good thing if he didn't. I don't believe he didn't, but I don't have evidence either way. So.
I don't think there's been any questions.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Would we all agree, though, the three of us here, that nobody would die for what they know is a lie?
No,
I don't. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I think people would die for something they know is a lie if it's strong enough.
No, hold on. If somebody knows that something is a lie, I don't think there's any instances of somebody willingly going to their death for something they knew that was untrue, that wasn't true.
Actually, you know what's very interesting? We just talked about Buddhism. Let's talk about Buddhism a little bit more. Buddhism has this idea of upaya, or useful or skillful means. That basically means a lie. There's nothing wrong in Buddhism about lying as long as it's for the sake of enlightenment and the sake of the teaching. And
you don't get enlightened by lies. You don't get enlightened. These documents as well, there's only, if I remember correctly, Gavin would probably correct me on this, there's only, I think, 9 very early manuscripts for Euclid. Obviously, you got Plato's writings, Aristotle, which Gavin mentioned. Very few manuscripts for that. And I do believe there's more than 5,000, actually.
Yeah, 6,000 almost.
Sorry?
Almost 6,000. I think it's 5,710 or something.
Yeah, it's getting close to 6,000.
I actually thought it was a lot more than that, but there you go.
Well, we have other manuscripts. We have like 20,000 other manuscripts, but they're not in the original Greek. They're like translations.
Oh,
See, here's this. This is a classic illustration of why the non-Christian worldview is fallacious. And I'm gonna use my learned friend here. My learned friend has a religious worldview that he claims to know something. He claims to know something about reality that hasn't been and may never be empirically proven. And this is the whole problem with atheism or believing in another religion. People claim to know something. They claim to know something.
Yeah.
Something fundamental about reality that hasn't been. Oops, sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
My phone fell down.
Can I respond, by the way? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah. Just give me a sec.
Yeah.
People who are atheists or of other faiths, they claim to know something fundamental about reality, and that is that the God of the Bible does not exist. This is what the atheist says: God does not exist. Other people from other faiths don't hold to the fact that the God of the Bible doesn't exist. But that's a claim. That is a claim that has never been empirically proven and probably will likely be never empirically proven. So it's just a claim that people believe in. Whereas the Christian, we've got, what have we got? 2,000 years worth of literature, archaeological evidence that shows the Bible is accurate and what was written about it. We've got scholarship that is huge, that supports the New Testament and the resurrection. So I'll yield there.
can I ask you, Dharma?
Let me just respond to that quickly because you actually made a false claim. So actually, there's a whole school of Buddhist Mahayana philosophy called Madhyamaka philosophy. And in Madhyamaka, the whole book ends with saying, I wish I knew the direct quote, but praise be to the Buddha who gave us the true view of relinquishing all views. Right. So actually, the whole position of that school of philosophy is to say we don't have any views and we don't make claims. So you claim that I make claims, but actually there's a whole school of Buddhist philosophy that's exactly against making any claim about reality.
You've been making claims this whole debate, my friend.
Well, sure, because this is the context of the debate, but I wouldn't accuse a Buddhism of making claims when there's a whole school of philosophy that's explicitly rejecting that. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Have you just
asked me a question
about not making claims, Dharma?
I'm sorry. What, you repeat that?
Have you just made a claim about not making claims within your religion of Buddhism?
Right. Well, again, we talk about skillful means. In Buddhism, we may have a distinction between what's ultimately true and what's conventionally true. And I don't make ultimate statements. I'm making statements based on our context and in our situation.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
Because I did notice at the beginning, if you'll forgive me for perhaps misquoting you, why do you? I think you said you weren't interested in prophecies in Scripture. Because I believe I can illustrate.
No, that's not what I meant.
In the New Testament from the Tanakh, the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's not what I meant. I just meant that it wasn't an interesting debate topic. I thought it would be more interesting.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, for me, it's not interesting. But no, I mean, I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying that it's not a thing. I'm just saying that it wasn't interesting for me to talk about. I don't feel interested about it.
Okay.
I find the prophecies about Christ to be compelling, considering some of them were written 1,000 years before he was born. Imagine writing about the name of the town that he was going to be born in, and that town didn't even exist when the prophet was writing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a different debate topic, and I don't really want to go down that route.
Yeah, I wonder why. Oh dear.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I would argue.
Only
I
kidding.
mean, my position, if you want to hear it, I would say that every single one of those prophecies is fake, and you could show that they're all fake. But that doesn't matter.
Oh, come on. I mean, yeah. Okay.
It's not the debate, so I don't want to talk about it. But if you want to talk about that, we can. I just don't find it interesting.
What would, I mean, you know, one thing I find sort of vaguely interesting about atheists is that a lot of the times on Clubhouse, they spend a lot of time arguing against God, and yet they would say they don't believe God exists. And frankly, to me, it doesn't make sense for someone to talk about someone that they do not believe exists.
Yeah.
So they're arguing from a position of, I would say, stupidity, really. Because before I got saved, you couldn't have got me talking about God because I didn't believe God exists. And obviously, I got saved, you know. Well,
Yeah. Well, I'm not.
you know,
For me, it's
because
just
I had a
speaking.
mathematical sort of Cartesian sort of mindset.
Yeah, I don't like that type of philosophy at all. But anyway, from my perspective, I'm just saying from my perspective, I can't speak for everyone. From my perspective, I'm interested in it from a philosophical perspective.
Yeah.
And also, what was I going to say? I have a problem with the socio-political aspect. So I don't like how people, in the name of God, blow up buildings and torture children and stuff. Like, I have a
No,
problem with that.
no. Hold on. Let's not conflate that kind of behavior with Christianity because that is.
No, I'm not saying. I didn't say that. I'm sorry. I didn't say with Christianity. I'm just saying there are people who do believe in God who do that. I'm not saying it's just Christianity does that.
Well, then
Muslims
I
do
would
that
say
too.
which God do they believe in? Because that's not the God I believe in. I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's a different debate. I'm just saying that's kind of why I talk about this stuff.
With the atheists, Bob, and I'm not including you in this, Dharma, but with the atheists, they commit what's called a genetic fallacy all the time. And I'll give you an example. If I argue that the belief that the Earth is that a round Earth is false because I read it in a comic book, I'm committing what's called a genetic fallacy. And this happens all the time particularly in the context of religion, because atheists will often argue, and they do this often. They argue that religious beliefs, or our Christian beliefs, for example, they're false because we acquired that knowledge via the Bible, and the Bible was penned by men who were inspired by the Holy Spirit. So because the Bible was written by men who were inspired by the Holy Spirit, the atheist just hand waves it away and says you've acquired your knowledge through supernatural means, and they don't want to know anything about it. But that's officially called a genetic fallacy.
Yeah, but they commit the same thing, Gavin, as you've just stated, I think, because a lot of their so-called philosophy derives either from Plato or Aristotle. Plato had a transcendental sort of argument, and Aristotle didn't. But they're based their whole philosophy is based on Platonistic reasoning, isn't it, or Egyptian? Because I think Plato went to Egypt.
You're talking about atheists?
Yeah, atheists. Yeah.
Well, a lot of atheists are modernists, and they don't really accept pre-modern ideas. Modernism is kind of just like scientific rationalist materialism.
You mean brute facts?
I'm sorry?
You mean atheists argue from so-called
brute facts?
Yeah.
Some of them do, but yeah, they just kind of are. They're very modernistic. They don't hold pre-modern views. I used to be a Platonist.
What I'm saying, Dharma, is that their philosophical reasoning comes from Platonistic roots.
Yeah, no, I don't think. I mean, some of them maybe, but most of them are not. Most of them are just basic, like scientific materialists.
Are they? A lot of atheists I've noticed, though, are ex-Catholics. I don't know if you've noticed that, Gavin.
Well, I'm actually former Eastern Orthodox.
Well, that's Catholic.
Well, there you go. If you call it Catholic, that's fine. I call it Putinism, but yeah, it is what it is.
Putinism. Did you want to open the room, Bob, if anyone wants to come in?
If somebody wants to come in, you can do. As soon as you come in the studio, I don't know if you know anybody in the side chat, Gavin, do you?
I can't see the side chat, Bob, not through my phone.
Right. Nobody's saying they want to come in. I've got 7 people watching.
Right.
If Dwayne Burke wants to pop in, he's more than welcome.
Dwayne's actually got a good argument.
Yeah, more than welcome.
He's got a good argument.
I know the sound of his voice, so
yeah.
If you're listening, come on in.
Yeah.
I've got the link ready.
Dwayne's been working on an argument for the existence of God.
Oh yeah.
Which is very interesting. It's very interesting.
Well, I'll put a link in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if there's nothing else, I'm gonna probably get going. I didn't want to stay here over 2 hours, just because I don't want to stay too long.
Yeah.
I don't like long debates and long discussion. I like shorter stuff.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks, Dharma. I appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Yeah. If you want to come up with a more another, I shouldn't say more,
another
debate topic.
Yeah.
Then yeah, no, I'm down if you want to talk about it.
That'd be great. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
What's your main reason, Dharma, for
what?
Not believing in Jesus Christ and who he is?
In Jesus?
Manifest in the flesh.
My main reason. So my main reason why I don't believe it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, right now it's just because I don't need that.
You don't what? Sorry.
I don't need it. My life works fine without it. But if you're asking me like why did I leave Christianity, that's a different question.
Well, I don't know if see, the trouble is we could get into a right old argument there, because some Christians would say, "Oh, well, you were never Christian."
Never Christian, yeah. I know.
Because you became a buddy, and they would say that you could rightly claim a no true Scotsman fallacy.
Right. Well, then there are people who say that. I'm sorry. I'm saying there are people who say that like a Calvinist view, which would say like, maybe I am a Christian, I just don't know it because God has predestined me to salvation. So like maybe I am a true Christian, but I'm not aware of it, and eventually God will save me anyway. Like who knows? I don't know.
I'm not keen on Calvinism at all. I would hesitate to call it biblically Christian because they would state limited atonement, and I would say, well, who's limiting it? Because God certainly isn't. So please tell me who is.
Yeah, well, they would say God is limiting it, but I'm not a Calvinist. I'm not a Calvinist.
If Jesus had mentioned atonement on the cross and said, well, yeah, I'm doing this for the atonement as part of the atoning sacrifice, except for such and such, then I could go with it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was nice talking to you, Gavin. If there's nothing else, I think we're gonna. I'm gonna end it here. If there's nothing else.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anytime you want to debate, I don't care what time of day it is, as long as it doesn't interfere with any of my mandatory appointments, then no problem.
Yeah, I actually have an appointment couple appointments next month, but nothing.
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
I will host any old debate as long as the people that come in are polite and there's no swearing and it doesn't turn into a dumpster fire. I don't care.
Yeah. Well, maybe Gavin wants to debate a topic I wanna say. I mean, I would debate I want to debate the transcendental argument against the existence of God. I don't know if Gavin knows the transcendental argument for God tag. Maybe we could do that debate.
Yeah, that'd be a great topic
against God. But
that'd be a great topic.
Sure. Whatever you want to do.
You have a transcendental argument, do you, Dharma? even though Buddha wasn't resurrected?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Can you define the transcendental? I know I'm going to sound stupid now, but basically, the transcendental argument is argument for the existence of God, isn't it? Obviously,
Yeah.
but it's more like a spiritual argument for God.
Yeah, a transcendental argument. This is the transcendental argument in like traditional form. It's something like there are these transcendental properties that exist, like time and space and self and stuff, and that those things need to be justified, and that Christianity justifies those things, and no other worldview can. That's the transcendental argument.
Yeah.
It's not really about it's not really an argument from like the spiritual nature of God. It's more of an argument that there are these transcendental things that atheists can't account for.
Well, when I hear the word transcendental, I think something that transcends.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
That we have today.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Had. You know, like when I look at nature, I think, yeah, God put that there.
Yeah.
Right. When I look at myself, I'm extremely handsome, by the way. When I look at myself, I do believe that God, created that, and so that is a transcendental argument, isn't there? There's something.
Yeah, that's more of a teleological argument. Yeah, I mean, I understand what you mean by transcendental. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Dharma, have you got an argument against the transcendental argument?
Yeah. So if I don't know if you've used transcendental arguments, but my argument against the transcendental argument is that so I'll just rummage off the 4 premises again. The first premise is that these transcendental things exist. The second premise is that they need to be justified. The third premise is that Christianity can justify them. The fourth premise is that no other worldview can justify them. Therefore, God exists. I would argue that every one of those premises can be questioned, but it doesn't matter. I would just deny that burden, that claim can support its burden of proof, because in order to have the claim work, in order for the claim to obtain, that's a famous philosopher, philosopher speak, to obtain, it requires it such that every worldview cannot account for those things, and that means you have to actually show that every worldview can not account for those things, and that hasn't been done. So
right, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I think
the transcendental argument or not, but
yeah,
I
try to stick. Yeah, I try to stick more to an evidentialistic argument or evidentialism. But it seems to me that on Clubhouse there's quite a few tag proponents or presuppers, and their basic argument is that all facts and intelligibility can only be grounded in the God of the Bible. That's like a snapshot of what their view is.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, that's right. But I also have a problem with the claim that there is intelligibility. I'm not saying that there isn't, but I want to know what the argument is for intelligibility, and I don't think you can make an argument for intelligibility without arguing in a circle. Because how can you make an argument for intelligibility without using intelligibility? That's just
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So maybe that's something. Maybe that's something we can work towards, perhaps having a debate about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're up for it.
What would you say is a necessary precondition for intelligibility, Dharma?
What would I say? Well, I would just. So, what would I say? So, like I said before, I would question whether or not it makes any sense to argue for preconditions of intelligibility without using intelligibility. But if I had to give an answer, what is necessary for precondition for intelligibility, I would say that probably the mind. Having a mind is probably a necessary precondition. Probably, I don't know if it's the only one, but it's the one that I can think of.
Yeah, I've got one, but I haven't postulated it yet to anybody apart from. I'd really like to discuss it with someone, but it would still necessitate that. It would still sound like circular reasoning, but I think it might be actually a better argument than some other people have given.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm open for that. Do you want to talk about anything else, or do you want to call it?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Thanks for your time, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to come in. The link is in there.
That's fine, Bob. That's fine.
Yep.
Thanks for hosting and thanks for modding.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Let me know. Anybody, just email me or give Gavin an email, if you want to. I like the idea of doing debates on my channel,
Yeah, sounds good to me.
You take care. Take care, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay then, Dharma. See you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Right.
Oh, that's one in the bank. That's one in the bank, Bob.
Yeah. Have you any idea if you've got any more debates coming up, Gavin, as a result?
Yeah. I've got. I'm in kind of a fortunate position because my time's really flexible, and I've got. I'm on standby as a fill-in for a debate on slavery.
Oh yeah.
Because the people that are running the debate or hosting the debate, they're having trouble getting hold of one of the debaters. So they said to me, "Would you be okay to debate slavery in the Old Testament, without much notice?" I said, "Yeah, I'm ready now."
Yeah.
So that might just happen, today or tomorrow. I don't know. As far as future debates, let me see.
Oh, there's no rush,
Yeah.
I'm sick of hearing people. I mean, one point I would love to make in some of these debates on Clubhouse is that I think they were better off as slaves in Israel, because if they'd have gone to Rome as slaves, or what we now know as Turkey, or certain other countries, they'd have been getting very, very badly treated. At least in Israel, there were some commands and
they had rights. They had rights, Bob. If you're a slave in Israel, you had rights. You had legal rights.
I know it's sort of relativism, but if you'd have gone to Rome as a slave, as a young lad, you could only imagine. Well,
yeah, true.
Yeah,
true. And a good thing to always remember is that God allowed slavery in the Old Testament, but he certainly didn't condone it. There's no verse or anything anywhere in the Old Testament where he encourages slavery and condones it.
Yeah, but it was better.
But he said,
I mean, the alternative would have been if a country got conquered by Israel, they take over the land, and you've got all these itinerant people, got no land, no homes, and whatever. They've been destroyed, and things like that. They would just starve to death.
Yep, that's
At least
true.
you could work for somebody, look after children, make a bit of money, like 7 years, and done and dusted.
That's what a lot of the ignorant atheists miss is that in most cases, and this is not in every case, but in most cases, when it came to indentured servitude or indentured slavery, it was the person who was the servant or the slave who approached the master of the house.
And asked,
in most cases.
Oh yeah.
So they willingly approach the master of the house.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be just any old house. It'd be quite a wealthy sort of place.
Yeah.
And they may have like a large debt that they can't pay off. So, they would.
What's that terrible about going out into the hedgerows and finding people to work for a day's wage, for a penny?
In the Gospels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. Yeah.
you know, you'd have had people who were looking after a farm. They might have had a couple of 100 acres. They just seen somebody itinerant on the highways and byways, and they said, "Look, you know, do you want to earn a day's pay and come back every day? You'll be fed and looked after." You know.
Yep. There's another thing that atheists don't even think about, and they're clueless about, which is why they're atheists.
Yeah.
Is that God brought the Israelites up out of slavery in Egypt.
Yeah, another point. Yeah.
So that's a great point to make from the get-go. God doesn't condone slavery. He brought his people. He brought his chosen people, Israel, up out of slavery from Egypt.
Yeah. And of course there were abuses. I mean, you know, where there's people involved.
Yep.
You know, you get that kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah, that's dead right.
But that is a very excellent point there, Gavin.
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
It's not original to me, Bob. This is just what I've read from the scholars.
Yeah.
How do you think the debate went?
Oh, very well, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, great. Yeah.
Right.
I don't know what they've voted. I can't see it. But there's a vote. It should be going live in about 4 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully people
will get
vote. I think I did see. Hold on. Yeah, I'll read it out. Dharmakaya 60%. 40% said they'd vote later on.
Okay.
Unfortunately, nobody voted for you, Gavin.
Oh, well, that's okay.
I think that's just... Anyway, I'm going to put that poll. Yeah, people can't even be honest about their opinion. And, you know...
Yep.
Like it's some sort of personal thing or something. It's just childish. I don't think Dharmakaya made his point. A lot of it is very lightweight, personally. I mean, he would, you know, he gives credibility to the Buddhist Bhagavad Gita and whatever writings. Well, what's the historical evidence for any of that stuff? Even that Buddha existed.
Yeah. And that's so off topic, it's not funny. We're not talking about the Buddha.
No.
We're not talking about the Vedas. We're talking about the resurrection.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. That is the main point, isn't it? Yeah, changing.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, but I, as soon as you said to me, no, he hasn't provided any citations or references, I knew that he was gonna. He wasn't going to be very well prepared.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you talked to him on Clubhouse, but he brought a bit more to the argument. But I've witnessed a Buddhist before, and
right.
The slithery, Gavin.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
Yeah, I got banned from going to the chapel on Monday morning at Lindholm Jail because
really?
because I knew that the Buddhists were in there on a Monday morning. You see.
Yeah.
I went in there and witnessed to them.
Yeah. Hey, there's a good comment from Good News Gospel. A slave in modern terminology, biblically speaking, is akin to employment. 7 years work, and then either you become family, you know, part of the master's family, or you get a massive portion of land. It's better than modern employment. And he's actually dead right. He's dead right, Bob. The exit packages that slaves or indentured servants got after 7 years is way better than any exit packages that people today in the 21st century get when they leave employment. Some people don't get anything.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I would argue, I mean, I know for a fact that slavery still exists.
Oh, yeah, it does.
The atheists complaining about that. the slavery in Africa and Libya, it
Yep.
started again there. And I would argue that the prison system in the USA and even employment USA, UK, is basically slavery, because you're actually earning a lot more money than you're actually getting in your pay packet.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
understand
right.
the need for profit, it makes sense. But yeah, slavery still exists, it's still going on.
It does. Yeah, it does. It does. Hey, Bob, have you noticed that none of these atheists that we see on StreamYards or in Clubhouse will ever go into a Muslim room and try their nonsense out on the Muslims?
Why is that?
Because because atheists are renowned for doing no research and having a very short attention span. Yeah. They just want a Christian bash. That's all they want to do.
Well, there's a reason for that, isn't there?
I think so. Yep.
Yeah.
They are perishing. They're perishing, Bob. The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing.
Yeah. It's always Jesus that gets attacked. I mean, when the atheists start swearing,
yeah.
you know what name they use, don't they?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
So how are you okay over there, Gavin, in New Zealand? You all right?
Yeah, I'm good. Good, thank you. Yeah, everything's going well. We're coming into our summer, Bob, so the days are getting really warm and really long because we're on daylight saving.
Yeah.
And that's great. It's really great.
Yeah. We're coming into winter here. I love winter.
Oh, I know. You guys have your Christmas days indoors and it's probably really cold. We have our Christmas days outside with barbecues and shorts and T-shirts and singlets and that sort of thing.
Surfboards and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a complete reverse of you guys.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna check out what time James is tired is gonna stream. Just give me a minute.
Who?
James is tired. Have you heard of him?
He's streaming, is he? Yeah.
He's going to be today. Yeah, I just want to get the time.
Yeah.
Because he's supposed to be addressing these lies of praise, but I don't know. We'll see. Well,
it's unfortunate that he found out too late. What's going on, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not white knighting Gavin, but I really don't. I've got to say, I really don't agree with James is tired giving a sort of inquisition on Darth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just my opinion. I'm just saying. You know.
Yeah. No, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying.
No, I would never inquisition a Christian like that in front of people, but then, you know, I don't know. Anyway, if you're going, I am subscribed to his channel. I might pop over and see what he's doing. Yeah, I'll white knight the gospel as well, Bill. Yeah. I don't mind at all.
You there, Bob? Are you there, Bob?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's live in 2 hours. In 2 hours, he's going to be live.
It's 11 o'clock at night here. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That went fast.
Yeah.
You did a good job of modding. Well,
I just tried to stay out of the way. I knew you two would be okay, you know, working out between you, and that's it, you know.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if we had an absolute 100% proof? I mean, we believe we have proof from the scriptures. The atheists are never going to accept it unless they really look into it properly and read for themselves.
Yeah. But they have a huge bias, like you say, away from anything to do with the Bible, Jesus, God, Christianity, holiness, anything like that. But that's to be expected, you know. That's to be expected. That they are perishing, and they think the cross is foolishness.
Yeah. Do you think they're scared of believing in some way?
No, I don't think they're scared, Bob. I just think that they think that they are more intelligent than God, and they're too proud. They're too proud to submit to somebody, you know, higher than them.
Jesus Christ is very challenging, isn't he? Because of the, I mean, even though the word morality doesn't exist in Scripture.
Yeah.
They're afraid of that sort of moral challenge to their sort of moralistic worldview, aren't they?
Oh yeah. Well, they push really hard against the objective morals of God, which is why they bring up these atrocities in the Old Testament all the time. They bring them up.
Yeah.
But they don't. They're clueless. They're really clueless about the Bible and the context of things.
Yeah. Can I just ask you, Gavin? I'm not trying to be inflammatory or anything. I'm not trying to. If you don't want to answer, it's fine. When Tom Rabbit was questioning Praise I Am intensely.
Yeah. I saw that.
Was Tom like there with a pair of pliers on Praise's nipples or something?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Forcing him
Not
to
at
answer
all.
in that fashion?
No. No, my opinion of Praise is exactly the same as yours, Bob.
Yeah. I mean, I don't hate the guy. I mean, I just. Oh dear. Anyway, I'm just being a little bit facetious.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Right, Gavin, I'll let you go if you need to. If you want to stay, I mean, I'm quite happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I've actually got a bit of stuff to do, but I really appreciate you doing the modding and hosting.
Yeah,
you're reliable as the Rock of Gibraltar, Bob.
Well, I think the best way with a debate is, you know, you got two grown men in there.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to agree with the guy, but you know, part of a debate is being charitable, being polite, having a little bit of respect.
Reckon? Yeah, I think so.
Just, yeah.
You should be adult enough to be able to agree to disagree.
Yeah. I don't like all that interrupting stuff I see on Clubhouse. I do find it annoying.
Oh, it's rubbish. Yeah. It's rubbish.
Heckling and anyway.
And are you going to watch James's stream in 2 hours, Bob, or no? You're going to go to bed.
I might even record it, or
okay.
I don't know. Yeah, I'll probably pop over. I'll be awake.
All right. Okay. Well, if you're on a stream, I'll be there. I'll be there because.
Yeah.
Did you hear that argument I had with Praise
a
few days ago?
Yeah, I recorded it.
Right.
I've got it on the channel ready to go live.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'd say Praise and his two bird brain partners have been working overtime trying to figure out how they're going to get out of this.
Yeah, they can't. I heard them saying those things. I don't hate them. I don't respect them. But they implied certain things enough for it to be basically explicit.
Yeah.
I am disingenuity. I find a little bit annoying. Intensely annoying.
Yeah. They're not as clever as they think they are, Bob.
Well, I'm not as stupid as they'd like to think I am either. I'm far from it. Far from it.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that. I'm going to steal that, Bob. I'm going to write that down in my diary and use that.
Yeah, you can have copyright on it. I've got a few of the little wise sayings as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's really good.
Yeah, God's house is best.
Absolutely, amen.
Yeah, I think the only thing to do really, Gavin, basically, is pray for them or about them, depending on the mood
Yeah.
they're in, you know.
Yeah, you're right. You
Yeah,
did right. You did right, Bob.
because we know who walks amongst the candlesticks, and it's not.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not looking for worldly retribution at all.
No,
But
no.
you know, Praser's going to have to account for doubling down on his lies, and that's all it amounts to.
Mm. Well, he'll just double down on disingenuity, I think.
Yeah,
And ridicule.
but then
I mean, ridicule is the. Well, you've said this before. Ridicule is the last resort of the.
Yeah. That's why he mocks my accent and brings up my divorce and talks about how bad a debater I am. You know, this is all just deflecting away from any responsibility that he has to take for his puerile and rancid actions.
Yeah, I mean, the Christians I've met face to face and had fellowship with, which was a long time ago, really, they would never bring up the crime that you was in prison for, and they certainly wouldn't go on about your marriage, anybody's marriage, even if they.
That's right. They wouldn't put it on a public platform like YouTube, so the whole world could see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Gavin, I'll let you go. What time, where are you at? It must be.
It's not even midday yet, Bob. It's 11:17 on a Friday morning.
You'll be having a barbie, will you, before you go to James?
Oh, maybe. It's pretty warm, though. It's pretty warm down here.
I tell you what, I do love a salad, though.
Yeah.
Right. Right, I'll leave it there then, Gavin. God bless you for coming over.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I really appreciate it. And there's going to be more debates for you, I can assure you.
Yeah. And when you're communicating with the other guy, if it's Dharma or anybody else, ask them to bring notes and like references. I mean, you can share screen anytime they want. It's no problem.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But you know what I'm like, Bob. I always come with plenty of references and citations.
Yeah, I've got all those on there. Right. I'm going to play me outro and then.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. God bless you.
All right. Unless you wanted to talk a bit more, Gavin, no problem.
No, I've got a few things to do, but I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah,
seriously.
No, yeah, I mean, I would have stayed here till breakfast. I would, it's no problem.
Yeah, I would have liked people to ask questions or come in and chat, but maybe people got other things to do.
Yeah, well, this recent stuff is sort of poisoning the well a little bit.
I know. I understand.
Yeah. Anyway, God bless you, Gav. Thank you.
Yeah. God bless you, Bob. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye.